Team 5 from Equifax is on deck, and looks like we've got their deck up, so we should be ready to go. So Team 5, if you want to introduce your members, and the stage is yours.
Is John Power on? See him here. John, have your microphone activated? All right, John, you're off mute. You ready to go?
Okay, you can hear me?
Can hear you fine.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. We are Team Equifax and delighted to be here to present our TechSprint output. Next slide, Matt, please. We're a global data and analytics organization who define our purpose as helping people live their financial best. In pursuit of that, we actively engage on policy matters with the Bureau, the Fed, the OCC, in the UK, the FCRA, ICO, Turing Institute, and others. Our work this week has been conducted across a multidisciplinary team. Our presenters today will be Matt Turner and myself, John Power. We have focused our attention on the problem statement provided by the Bureau, and we'll show an innovation that will help consumers to improve their credit scores. You will hear today how we propose to enable that not just for those in receipt of adverse action notices, but for all consumers. We believe this to be a globally unique initiative, one that offers a real paradigm shift in helping consumers to improve their credit score. Adverse action reason codes are great at telling a consumer what's holding down their score, but they leave it to the consumer to determine what to do about it. That is no easy task. Credit scoring is complex. It is based on the interaction of multiple variables and becomes ever more complex with the use of AI. Who in this virtual room would claim to understand the detail? We're presenting Optimal Path, and that tells consumers the optimal actions to take to improve their score. It works at individual consumer level, providing a path unique to each and every consumer. It will enable declined consumers to become approved in the fastest, most reliable way. Better than that, it can be used by all consumers to enhance their score, whether or not they've been declined and received adverse action notices. This will enable so-called good credit applicants to not just get the approved that they already would have got, but to get it at a better price point. As a side benefit, the level of financial education facilitated by this tool may reduce defaults, benefiting consumers, lenders, and market stability. Optimal Path is applicable to every credit market in the world. The maths behind Optimal Path are complete and fully tested. Today, we'll show you a mock-up of a consumer-facing prototype that is currently in development. This prototype will be finalized over the next 60 days, and we expect to be production ready in Q1 21. We foresee distribution to include via lenders, consumer advocacy bodies, and CRAs. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you, John. A scoring surface is a mountain, and a consumer asks, why am I here? Well, it's because you just fell down this cliff. This is a reason code, and they're very useful to the consumer. It tells the consumer why they received the score they did. But the consumer might ask, well, how do I get back up? Well, you could try climbing back up the hill, back up the cliff, or you could try taking one of these paths back up the mountain. This is what is known as a credit simulator. It's a trial and error method that's very useful to the consumer. But we can recommend a particular path, since that path might be the easiest. This is what we call optimal path. Using consumers that look like you today, that were able to improve their score a month later. What is the easiest, most feasible action that I could take to improve my score? So using the FICO challenge data set that was mentioned in the sprint kickoff, we constructed a regression model to predict whether a consumer is likely to default on a HELOC loan. In order to visualize results in this discussion, we restricted the model to just two variables: utilization on revolving accounts and maximum delinquency in the last 12 months. Let's start by looking at what the consumer has available to them today. Throughout, let's consider a consumer who has 120-day delinquency 1 month ago, and they're at 15% revolving utilization. In a logistic regression scorecard, the number one reason code returned would be the 120-day delinquency, because it caused this consumer to lose about 280 points, dropping them from a score of 750 down to a score of 470. The number two reason code would be high utilization, because it caused this consumer to lose about 55 points, dropping their score from a 525 down to a 470. If the consumer acts on either of these reason codes, either by lowering their max delinquency in the last 12 months or by lowering their revolving utilization, their score will improve. These reason codes are logical and they are actionable. However, max delinquency is hard for the consumer to immediately take action on. They must wait at least 12 months for this to roll out of their credit score. So how do they determine how to improve? A trial and error credit simulator will show the consumer that they could raise their score from, say, a 470 to a 700, but it would take 12 months. Or they could raise their score from a 470 to a 505 by lowering their utilization to, say, 5% in the next month. But are either of these actions feasible to the consumer? So instead of relying on trial and error credit simulations, what if instead we could identify a sequence of feasible monthly actions that the consumer could execute in order to improve their credit score, in order to get approved or to get better rates? We call this algorithm optimal path. Optimal path starts by identifying a cluster of consumers that looks like you today. We can use information such as account balances or utilizations, number of accounts, delinquencies and recency of delinquencies, income, length of credit history, etc. We can then determine a distribution of the monthly changes these consumers were able to execute in 1 month in order to improve their score. Using this distribution of changes, we can introduce a metric on what actions are feasible and which actions are not very likely. Using this metric, we can optimize the most feasible action that achieves a desired score increase. This is a constrained optimization problem. We then project that this consumer will complete the action in 1 month, and we repeat the algorithm. It leads to a sequence of monthly actions that should be feasible for the consumer to take in order to improve their credit score by a desired amount within a given time frame. Returning back to the consumer we were looking at, since this consumer recently had 120-day delinquency, and the attribute that we're considering in this model is maximum delinquency in the last 12 months, it is not feasible for this consumer to immediately change this attribute right away. So even though they received the score they did of 470 because of this delinquency, it's also not the most actionable item available to the consumer. Instead, it would be better to pay enough on the past due balance to bring the account to, say, 90 days delinquent, and then focus on utilization for the next few months. The path returned here is logical and it's actionable. If the consumer follows the recommended advice, their score will improve. The path is also feasible because it's measured by other consumers in similar situations that were able to complete these actions. This technology I'm showing you today on Optimal Path is model agnostic. It doesn't just apply to logistic regression. It can also apply to our explainable AI technology, where we can both provide the logical, actionable reason codes that tell a consumer why they received the score they did, but it can also generate the optimal path that tells them potentially a different set of actions they could take over time to improve their score.
Just as a notice, we're at 10 minutes and we have 2 questions in the queue.
Okay. So what might this look like to the consumer? In addition to reason codes and a credit score text report, we could also provide a URL for the consumer to learn more. At the URL, consumers could get a more in-depth look at reason codes, along with access to score simulators and a new Optimal Path dashboard that provides a sequence of feasible actions tailored specifically to that consumer to improve their credit standing over time. In the dashboard, consumers would see their current credit information and enter a desired score in a desired time frame. The Optimal Path algorithm would compute the easiest month-over-month actions the consumer could take to incrementally improve their score. And each month in the time series, hovering over that month would show the consumer their target credit file, tracking such categories as balances, utilizations, current payment status, past due amounts, and number of accounts and inquiries. I'll turn it back over to John.
Okay, let me just wrap up. So we've shown today an innovation with the ability to build further upon adverse action communications to provide significant customer benefit, both for credit applicants who would have been declined and also applicants who could enhance their score still further and avail of better products or price points. Optimal Path can be deployed globally. It provides logical and actionable guidance tailored to the individual circumstances of every consumer. We trust that this initiative aligns to the expectation of the Bureau for an innovative and paradigm-shifting initiative. We thank you for the opportunity to participate and would welcome your thoughts on what we have presented.